Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's weekly wrap. It's the 31st of July. Oh, God, the 31st of July already, 2026. And joining me today is Mirko Kagura. How are you, Mirko?
Well, and I heard the music in the background. I think if I'm not mistaken, it was Hit the Road Jack. Is that right, Luke? Is that what we're
Mate,
running with?
it was Hit the Road Jack, one of Ray Charles's all-time classics, I will say that. And a very apt song given the week we've had here in Victoria, but we'll talk more about that in a sec. You had a good week, mate.
Yeah, it's been a good weekend. A bit like you, I cannot believe today's the last day of July. It seems like yesterday we were dusting ourselves off from another end of financial year, and it certainly started as game on going into the new one, that's for sure.
One of the things I will remember is when I first started in the industry 30 years ago, Mirko, my God. But when I first started in the industry, would always say to me, "Oh, time flies as you get older." Geez, they weren't lying. Time is definitely flying, mate. Look, if I can just probably get a quick market update. It's been a big week on markets.
Yeah, it certainly has, and it's been, I would say, all good in terms of where we're at after the end of the week. We're in the green, but it has been super volatile. And if I can throw a couple of numbers your way, like the S&P 500 in the US, for example, overnight was up 1.67%. Day before it was down 1.5. You look at the Nasdaq, similar scenarios. We had 3 days where it was up best part of 3%, then it was up 2.78. So it has been all over the shop. We are in the green for the week to date. In Australia, we had a cracking start to the week. We had 3 green days. We were up 1.37% on Monday alone, up 2.2 for the week. So the Australian market clawing back, and a lot of it's around noise that we're it's starting to sound like noise. When you listen to the Reserve Bank, when you listen to the Federal Reserve in the US, and what's happening there. The US held rates on hold this week, but very quick to point out that they're going to have a red hot crack at inflation. In Australia, we had some data come out this week just around our inflation numbers, and inflation, yes, did rise a little bit, but not as much as what was expected. So it was seen as a bit of a positive for Australia, and perhaps indicating that we won't get a rate rise in August coming up in the next week or so. And but the market responded positively to that. That's not to say that we may not see some rate rises again down the track. So really a case of trying to filter what's happening in the market, what's happening with inflation, with interest rates around the world, with 10-year bond prices, and with geopolitical tensions which are on again, off again.
It's been a fascinating week, and look, just following up on that inflation piece, we saw here in Australia we did have a softer inflation number, and that was the spark for the Aussie market to go boom. It looks fantastic, and it looks like the threat of a rate rise may have dissipated at least for now. As to whether or not that would go right through to Christmas, we don't know yet. And the US did the exact opposite. So we're seeing that their numbers are actually going up. Yet Kevin Walsh, the new federal chair, had his first big foray on the public speaking tour, and he's usually very good with the gift of the gab. But he came across looking a little bit uncertain, I dare say, and probably with the market scratching its head in terms of what's happening in the US and the direction of rates.
Yeah, look, he was pretty reluctant to sort of, put it out there, where he believes rates are going to go, and he was sort of put on the spot by the media as well, during the press conference. And there was a bit of can you please explain, X to me? And yeah, there wasn't much of an explanation. There was a bit of furrowing of the brows, and what language do you speak of? So people were a bit taken aback by that, because usually, as you said, quite an eloquent speaker, speaks really well and very confident.
Oh, he is, and I think the question that I really enjoyed the most was, when do you act? And it was just such a simple question, and just a real common sense question, and yet that was the question that stumped him.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
yeah, and when it came to giving the market insight, and I think this is where he needs to be really careful, because I reckon you've got I reckon as a federal chair, you can hoodwink the market. And, you know, investors are investors, and investors can be gullible at time, and investors sometimes will look at the glass half full rather than the glass half empty. The bond market doesn't behave like that, Mirko. And we've seen the bond market. When the bond market gets angry, the bond market is the true is the true determinant of what happens next.
That's exactly right, and the reason behind that is that the bond market really sets the precedent for what's happening down the track. Has a lot to say about the risk-free rate that we enjoy, and it's around those rates that investors make decisions around. Is it worthwhile being an investor? And when bond rates spike above 5% like they did earlier on in the week, market starts asking its questions, and asset allocators are then asking themselves questions: will I be paid enough to hold growth type assets when I know I can get paid 5 point something, for 10 years? So, these are the grapples that we have. That's why when people talk about the bond market, they're so adamant to sort of say, let's have a look at what's happening in that space. And, volatility in bond markets is actually not good for the markets, let me tell you.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the volatility that we've seen in this week of the up and downs and the sheer swings, I think that's a prelude of what's to occur next, particularly over this next quarter as the data comes through.
100%. That's what we'll be watching, and as you rightly pointed out, we actually spiked over 5% after that the presser from Wash.
Yeah, no, interesting one. And here in Australia, we've seen some data on the housing sector coming out from NAB saying that borrowing applications are down as much as by 15%. That's a sizable drop.
Yeah, and we're starting to really see that take bite and across the banks, that the level of applications are down. Talking to a few mortgage brokers, very much the case that the level of activity that they were experiencing has fallen off a cliff. Even people that had sort of, a lot of people get pre-approvals that survive for 90 days, and then you can re-establish those for another 90 and the like. A lot of them have said, you know what, don't worry about it. I'm going to sit on the sidelines for the time being. I think we're starting to see that with clearance rates as well. And when there's the data that they want us to understand, and there's the data that's the real data. And we get a lot of properties withdrawn from auction and the like. So it's not really a true gauge of where the market's at, but I know that Australians have a love affair with property, and we all sort of try and pay attention to what's happening in our own areas. Within 5-6 blocks of our own homes, you can tell what's going on. Things are taking longer to sell, and auctions are starting and finishing with passed in vendor bids, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, the property market is certainly being tested at the moment.
Yeah, and look, one out of left field too, Mirko. I was speaking to an agent recently, and we were just having a chat about settlements and so on. And one of the things, or one of the unintended consequences, or perhaps an intended consequence by the government, was the anti-money laundering schemes. So as of the 1st of July, from a real estate agency point of view, if you acquire a property from that end, they need to confirm the validity of the money, where the money's come from, as we would do in the financial planning space from that point of view. So the reporting requirements have increased enormously. And one of the things from a property perspective was you could previously do that without having to disclose any of this sort of data. Now that purchasers are having to disclose that sort of data, there's been actual activity of people having paid for a deposit and then not settling because they've chosen not to provide where the money has come from, which would probably point to maybe money's not coming from legal sources.
Well, we may start settling properties in cryptocurrency.
It's a fascinating time, that one. It's a fascinating time. Now, Mirko, it has been a massive week in Victoria. You and I have been staunch critics of what's been happening in this state for a while, and we've been having our say and so on. And this week we saw Jacinta Allen fall on her sword and exit stage left. And we saw Ben Carroll, her trustworthy and reliable deputy, who I think only a couple of weeks ago prior to had said, mate, you have my word that I would never do anything untoward. All of a sudden he's standing in the leadership role. Are we happy, one, with Jacinta's exit? And what do you think Jacinta will be remembered by?
I would have preferred to actually go to the election and let the voters decide on this. Ultimately we didn't actually vote the premier in, nor have we voted her out. So much the same now for Ben Carroll. I, we know that the state is in disarray and things are not looking flash. I did pay attention to her sort of exit speech, and one of the things that sticks in my mind was her thanking her union comrades. I thought that was fair. That was a fitting summary of her tenure. As premier, I thought, really? But look, Ben Carroll has landed himself in a job that I don't know too many people want. So I hope that he can make some inroads. And look, he's saying all the right things. He went out on a limb and said, "I'm not Daniel Andrews. I'm not Jacinta Allen." All right, tick. But he is saying that he wants to be pro-business and all the rest of it. So it'll be interesting to see if some of the policies that are being pushed pretty hard and were being pushed pretty hard will be revised or perhaps withdrawn. Whether some of the big projects that are on the horizon, like the suburban rail loop and all that sort of, whether they go ahead or whether they get some tweaks. So yeah, he's got a big job ahead of him, and you're only a few months away from an election, so I don't know how much that will sway the electorate, this change.
Yeah, no, fair point with that. Fair point with that. I guess with Jacinta, there was a couple of things. Like, I think she opened her speech when she first started it, and she made reference to gender and then made also further reference to a health condition from that point of view. And that's not to diminish either one of those issues, or not that you need to diminish a gender piece from that end, but I'm not sure what the relevance of that was. I would have much preferred her to sit there and prosecute her record, and her record isn't great. The reality is we've got a state which has run out of control from a debt point of view. Now, in part of this, she did inherit part of this, but she was also the minister responsible for a lot of the big build stuff where a lot of the chaos has emerged. So I would have preferred a bit of a mea culpa session where perhaps you may look inwards and go, well, maybe I didn't get it all right, and maybe I did some things wrong, but clearly that was a problem. With respect to Ben Carroll, the only thing I would say is that, I liked his opening line of, "I'm not Daniel Andrews, nor am I Jacinta Allen." But let me just question this, Prince, or let me just point this out. You sat in every cabinet meeting, you voted yes on every occasion, and you never challenged once. So cut the BS. You were there. You're just as culpable as the other two idiots. Now, in saying that, there is an opportunity for Mr. Carroll to reset Victoria. And Victoria definitely needs a reset. And I think some of the things that you raised around the suburban loop, the rail loop, the point of this needs to be reconsidered. And if it isn't worthwhile doing, or if it needs to be paused or whatever from that point of view, things like this should be considered. What we need to do is Victoria desperately needs to re-establish its relationship with business. It has destroyed that relationship. And at the end of the day, if Victoria wants to be the driver of economic growth and economic prosperity in this country, it needs to have a good relationship there, and it doesn't. It's overtaxed business, it's hurt business through overregulation, and recent changes to legislation and the stupidity considered by the Allen government have caused a complete lack of trust in government here in Victoria. So if Ben Carroll is serious about wanting to make some changes and wanting to make some inroads, two things. I think, one, he should own his involvement in that previous government. And two, more importantly, he should set an agenda which is actually a pro-business and a pro-community agenda of wanting to grow this state. Because my fear is it's more of the same, press hard, 3 copies.
I get the feeling, Luke, that this was a bit of, if you're interested, please step forward, and everybody else step backwards, and he's sort of left standing there. It is. I don't envy the task ahead. Let's give him a chance and see what he comes up with. But yeah, I'll be very curious to see how much of a change you can make and what you can do about the past because, like you said, the checkered history, he owns some of it as well.
Oh, he does, he does. And look, and I get that. You support your leader, you do those sorts of things. But as a minister, one of your roles as a minister and one of your role is not to sit there and clap. You know, the damage of sitting there and clapping and just simply just saying, well, whatever the leader has said is absolutely right, you end up with the same situation like you do in the United States at this moment in time, which is a dog box at its best. So from that end, now since we've just mentioned the United States, there has been some emerging news. It looks like, and this is according to Trump and Truth Social, so you take it with a grain of salt, but it appears that Hamas have agreed to disarm, and it looks like peace might finally emerge on the Gaza Strip. Now, that's a fairly big statement, and if Trump is right in what he's saying there, that would be an extraordinary outcome. Clearly, for Hamas to disarm and to do all those sorts of things, it would need Israel's agreement and support, which hasn't come through the other side. But you know, to think that we could have peace in that region, that would be an amazing outcome, wouldn't it?
Oh, it would be an amazing outcome, and I'm sure our listeners are very proud of us for getting our fact checks from Truth Social, but we do that more for entertainment than anything else. Look, let's hope that there is actually some truth in that post, and you know we certainly haven't heard from the other sides that are involved here that is the case, but. Interestingly enough, markets have responded positively to that, and it just goes to show how fickle the market is when that's the stuff that we're looking into. So, all we can do is hope and pray that we actually do get, you know, for humane reasons, that we get peace in that area. Forget about the markets. What's going on is completely wrong. So we need an end to this rubbish.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And look, we've got to be honest there too. You know, President Trump suffers from premature acknowledgements at times, maybe in other areas too. Who knows? But he does suffer from that. So the reality here is we're a long way from any sorts of agreement. But the fact that you know the fact that there are murmurings coming out of Hamas that they are contemplating this is a good sign. One thing we probably should also acknowledge is that we're coming up to 5 years now of Ukraine and Russia. Hard to believe that it's been 5 years that this thing has been going on. And just listening to a podcast the other day, 1.2 million people have been killed in that war. It's an extraordinary number. So these are the consequences of dumb decisions. And these are the consequences of lunatics leading countries across the abyss from that point of view in terms of what Putin's trying to do and Ukraine in terms of trying to defend itself. So these are the consequences of war. So I absolutely acknowledge what you said before. You know, peace on earth is the thing that we want rather than focusing just on the market outcomes. But fingers crossed, hopefully that all works out. Now, Mirko, on Sunday night, I nearly choked on my Wheaties on Sunday night. I was sitting back because, you know, Sunday night you don't want to cook dinner, so you just grab whatever's in the pantry. So I was sitting there, I was watching 60 Minutes, and lo and behold, here's Alan Joyce, my favourite leprechaun, back on the screen, back on the screen, telling me how wonderful he is, and for it not being for him, Qantas would have fallen over. No mea culpa, no attempts to say, hey, maybe I got it wrong, maybe I'm sorry for treating customers poorly, for treating our staff terribly, and for just being an absolute leech from that point of view, but would sit there and try to reframe history in a very Trump-esque approach. I don't know if you saw it, but
I
my
did,
view
I
of it
did, I
was,
did see, I did see bits of it, and I had to quickly change the channel because I was not coping. But look, let's not, you know, let the facts get in the way of a good book launch. And perhaps if I plug, you know, Riding the Jet Stream, the name of his book, we won't get sued by him or something. But this is the same guy that illegally sacked 1,700 of his own staff and thought it would be a good idea before exiting stage left to sell his entire 17 million bucks worth of equity in the company as well, which he got a lot of heat for. So, yeah, I got to love this self promotion and the like. And you know, is there no shame? But there clearly there isn't.
No, mate, there isn't any shame there, and I've got to give him absolute credit. Like there is the bottom, and he's actually found a way to go underneath that. So kudos to you, Mr. Joyce. Live well in your little hole. Now, one thing I thought we should talk about quickly, because we were talking last week about the World Cup and how wonderful it was and what a beautiful experience it was. It appears that FIFA, and they are a rogue organisation at its finest, but it appears that FIFA and its president Infantino are thinking about selling the World Cup and packaging it up and selling it to private enterprise or a private company, of which surprisingly the Trump family has got its connections to in some way or form, and taking it away from the people and putting it in the hands of private investors. What could go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? They know how valuable the World Cup actually is, and they're looking at creating a $20 billion entity to actually capitalize on this. But again, yeah, there's, like you said, the Kushner families got their name all over this as potential investors and the like, and we know what those connections are. But nothing to see here, I suppose. I was really impressed with UEFA's response, and it was very blunt. You know what? Football is not FIFA's to sell. You don't own football. The game is actually owned by the people, and I thought that was quite an apt statement there, and hopefully common sense prevails. But you know what? I've seen those guys from FIFA historically stand up there and just blatantly lie to the people. So nothing would surprise me there.
Yeah, no, okay. I think life isn't complicated. We're only here for a small time, and I think the basic of being a good person, enjoying life, and being a good community is probably the best that most people can hope for. And things like football give us a bit of joy. It gives us that moment to watch the game, to enjoy all it has, to have the arguments and all those, and make fun from that end. It's something that should be, and it's something that's other people, and those in positions of power, or the rich and the wealthy and all that kind of stuff, can then take this away from the very people who game for their own benefit, to produce more monies for themselves and for nobody else. I think is abhorrent.
Well, it was just a week ago we were so positive on the World Cup and the joy that it brought to the people globally, right?
Yeah.
Even in Australia, it's not a footballing country, the round ball code, yet it brought this country together, and it didn't matter who you barrack for, what code you follow, you're on board with the Socceroos, as you always are with the Matildas, and that's what the world game does. And UEFA is 100% spot on. It's not your game to sell. The people own
Yeah.
it.
Oh,
But if they can sell it and make a buck, they're going to have a crack, and,
yeah, it's just
unashamedly.
horrendous. Yeah, it's just horrendous. It's a reflection of where society has lost its moral compass. It's just lost its axis, and you just kind of think, enough, enough. Just things aren't broken. You don't have to go in and destroy everything, for God's sake. Give us some joy. Give us some joy. A bit like the Essendon Football Club, just give us
Oh,
joy every once in a while.
don't go there. You promised me we're not talking AFL.
I must admit, I was really worried last week when you said if Hawthorn wins, you're not going to do weekly. Oh, sorry, if Essendon wins, you won't do weekly, because you were clearly concerned. So glad that Essendon laid. Okay, we're going to let Hawthorn, albeit by 93 points, albeit, but we're going to
You could have been doing it on your own today, weekly wrap. There was a massive risk there that you would have been just Luke on screen doing this on his own.
Yeah, no, I don't think so, man. I don't think so. But yeah, look, we won't. They're not that great. It's been.
Hey, if we're going to talk about sport, let's talk about the Tour de France, which finished up on Sunday night as
right.
well, and Tadej Pogacar has won again, fifth Tour de France win, amazing, and it's one of those sports events that is just. You could just sit back and watch the French countryside, and they do it so well. The way they actually present the country to you and the history and the like, it's amazing. And for someone to win it 5 times, And I know that, in the background, everyone's sort of going, geez, I hope it's a clean win and all the rest of it. So do I, to be perfectly honest, but it's an amazing feat nonetheless.
Mirko, it is one of my most favourite events of the year. I must admit, Tour de France is the year when your eyes hang out of the back of your head for the whole month. It is magnificent viewing, and someone like Tadej Pogacar, who, of a Slovenian background, so we're talking about a country of under 2.5-3 million people. His ability to ride up those mountains at the speed and at the pace and at the strength that he's got is extraordinary, and the fact that other riders are trying to keep up with him is extraordinary. It was fascinating viewing, and you're right, the broadcast and the way the broadcast works from that point of view, it feels like watching an episode of Getaway for 3 hours, 4 hours straight, and you do it night after night after night. It is just great stuff.
It's big kudos, actually, and must make mention with all this, pay TV and streaming service that we got. SBS needs a bit of credit here, both, with the tour, with the World Cup that they presented, and there's still a glimmer of hope for free-to-air TV, which is awesome.
Well, yeah, that too. The thing there too is they weren't commercial break every 50. It was magnificent.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah,
actually, that's one of my at the moment. Have you noticed on Netflix, that kind of stuff? Every time you want to watch something, there's more videos now, or there's more advertisements before your movie starts. That's why we bought that TV, so we wouldn't have commercials.
Yeah, forget that. They found out they can make money on that as well.
No, absolutely, mate. Absolutely. Now, what have you got planned this weekend? Anything exciting?
Pretty cruisy weekend for me. A friend of mine, his daughter's birthday coming up, and he's hit me up. He said, I need a hand with the spit, which means that I'll be at the party 5 hours early, and we'll be getting warned. Can you just make sure there's food by the time the guests arrive? You too. So, looking forward to that. That'll be a fun Sunday afternoon.
Oh, that is magnificent. That is magnificent. Well, you make sure you enjoy that birthday party and enjoy the spit, and I dare say the couple of drinks that you're going to have whilst making that spit.
It's all part of the entertainment. It's a process, Luke. You've seen it before firsthand.
I have seen it. It's the best way to be and the best way to live, I dare say.
What about you? What do you got on?
Mate, I think we've got a relatively quiet weekend. My darling, or my better half, is actually flying out to the Alice to catch up with our middle daughter, who's currently doing some wonderful work in the Alice, in the Indigenous communities from that point of view. So she's flying out there. So I'm batching it on the weekend. So I dare say there's a list on the fridge in terms of all the works and all the things that I need to do. So that'll be my project over the weekend, I dare say.
I reckon the couch is going to get a workout. Yeah, the only person on this screen hoping for rain this weekend right here.
Oh, well, I can tell you, you wouldn't believe it. And I've actually had a look, and I think we've got 2 beautiful sunny days coming up, and it's just like, oh, for God's sake.
No excuses. That list has to be done.
I'm hearing you, mate. I'm hearing you. Well, look, you have a cracking weekend. To our lovely staff out there, thank you, as always, for all the work that you do. And to our clients, as always, thank you. Thank you for the fun. Thank you for the entertainment. Thank you for the wonderful conversations. And thank you for always being open and willing to share your views. That makes life very, very interesting, and we enjoy it enormously. Until we see you next week, take care. We'll see you then. Cheers, guys.
See you guys.